Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Li Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to make up for the missing and some deliberately pieces of the puzzle. So join me in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. We live stream Headline Buster at 11 a.m. Beijing time on Thursdays and air the segment on Fridays. So do join us during the live streaming and get in touch. We would love to receive and possibly read out your insightful comments. Our topic today, Xizang, which is better known abroad as Tibet. Xizang is the pronunciation of the Chinese name of the region. Almost exactly 72 years ago, on May the 23rd, 1951, the Central People's Government of China and the regional authorities of Xizang signed an official agreement on the peaceful liberation of the region. Now, the deal, better known as the 17-Article Agreement, would pave the way for democratic reforms to be introduced in 1959. The reforms abolished Xizang's feudal theocratic serfdom and set free around 1 million slaves once and for all. Now, old Xizang was a dark place. British military journalist Edmund Candler, who visited Lhasa in 1904, wrote in his book, The Unveiling of Lhasa, that the people are medieval, not only in their system of government and their religion, their inquisition, their witchcraft, their incarnations, their ordeals by fire and boiling oil, but in every aspect of their daily life. According to legal codes used in Old Xizang, the value of life was measured according to a person's blood and position. The most high-ranking ones were worth their weight in gold, while the most unfortunate ones, a straw rope. With the liberation of Xizang in 1951, that became history. 7 decades later, the lives of Tibetans have been completely transformed. Now, from 1951 to 2022, the GDP of Tibet skyrocketed from renminbi 130 million US dollars to 213 billion. Renminbi we're talking about. That's a jump of over 1,600 times. The average life expectancy more than doubled from 35.5 years to over 72 years. And the overall population rose from some 1 million to 3.6 million. Ethnic Tibetans account for over nearly 90% of the region's total. That is over 3 million. In Old Xizang, there wasn't a single proper school. Illiteracy rate exceeded 95%. Now, Xizang offers for all 15 years of publicly funded education from kindergarten to senior high school. Where in the world do you have that? The completion rate for 9-year compulsory education has reached nearly 97%. And the list goes on. As a matter of fact, I just visited the region 3 weeks ago. Although it was only for a few days, I managed to dive deep under the surface. How do the locals live? Are they happy? Can they keep their fine traditions while modernizing? And the answer was clearly yes. In the capital Lhasa, I found a bustling city on way to modernity which embraces its heritages. Both in and around the iconic Patala Palace and Jogkhon Temple, I saw droves of devoted worshippers performing religious rituals without fearing disturbance. Inside the premises, worshippers and monks rubbed shoulders with tourists from all over the country. In the park, I joined locals performing traditional circle or tap dances. I may have had difficulties keeping up with their steps, but I was swept away by their joyfulness. Now, I have shared with you hard facts and my personal feelings. However, they don't seem to matter when politics and ideology come into play. What I'm referring to is the latest annual so-called International Religious Freedom Report published by the US State Department. Now, the report, as it always does, claims that religious freedom in China is a particular concern. It was tweeted by U.S. Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns on May the 17th. But first of all, I'm curious, does this report include the United States? That's a rhetorical question. If not, does the U.S. not consider itself part of the international community? America claims to be a land of the free, but if it chooses not to believe in religion, especially Christianity, life may be not so kind. In Arkansas, for instance, the state constitution says no person who denies the being of a God shall hold any office in the civil departments of the state, nor be competent to testify as a witness in any court. Astonishing, right? Such articles would be in place. In fact, in 2023, as we speak, there are still a total of 8 states in the United States which have similar clauses on the books. Is this religious freedom? Some people say, well, one of such books has been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. But mind you, being an atheist or communist in the United States is not an advantage, especially if you want to run for public service. And this is only one problem impeding religious freedom in the United States: discrimination against Muslims, politicization of religious beliefs, Christian nationalism, to name but a few. What has the US government done about these? Any progress? Are they printing an annual report on religious freedom in the United States? Unless and when they do that, we can accept that they talk about the rest of the world. Not surprisingly, the U.S.'s scrutiny is focused on others, especially those considered different-minded. China gets the privilege every year. And this year, the part on Xizang was 34-page long, alleging that religious believers suffer from discrimination and even persecution. On May the 16th, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin didn't mince his words.
We do not accept it and categorically reject it. We urge the U.S. to face up to and reflect on its own problems, respect the facts and truth, stop applying double standards, and stop using the so-called human rights, religious, and ethnic issues to meddle in China's internal affairs.
As I said earlier, I was there and I saw a peaceful Xizang. What I definitely didn't see was religious oppression. I wonder if the writers of the report ever been to Xizang at all. Otherwise, they would not come up with such nonsense. However, the media treated the State Department report unquestioningly and just chewed and spit it out. This ABC News report says, although data is limited, the survey also noted that the Chinese Communist Party has significantly and broadly cracked down on religious freedom over the course of the year. Well, if data is limited, how can one conclude there is a significant and broad crackdown? The article doesn't specify the content of the data and where it comes from. Out of thin air? This article on RFA accuses the Communist Party of China of religious sinicization. It says Beijing is trying to sinicize all religious activities in line with Communist Party doctrine. Well, it makes that classic mistake, or rather plays the classic trick of snatching Chinese quotes out of contexts and fit preconceived conclusions. Here, the sample is Chinese leaders' vow to remain committed to the principle that religions in China must be Chinese in orientation and provide active guidance to religions so that they can adapt to socialist society. Immediately, the phrase Chinese orientation is given the straight jacket of sinicization, a derogatory term referring to assimilation in the culture of Han, the main ethnic group of China. Somehow, the term has been expanded to cover influence of the party. But what China is calling for by Chinese orientation is really that religions in China should help support unity and prosperity of the country, especially the main religions, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, and Islam. In which country should religions not be expected to do so? And what's wrong with guiding religions to adapt to society? Isn't it the hallmark of a society respectful of all beliefs? Religion must find its place within the society, not the opposite. Now, I don't want to bore the bejesus out of you. I think I've made my point, but I like to draw your attention to an embarrassing turn of events which had been widely reported recently when the Dalai Lama asked if a young boy wanted to suck his tongue. Now, in a related article, the BBC somehow decides to challenge the slave history of Xizang, calling it a controversy. It says, historically, the Dalai Lama did not directly own serfs, as he was seen as the sovereign of Tibetan society. Everyone in Tibet was considered his subject, much like people in the UK are subjects to the king. The article cites a scholar on Xizang. I nearly died laughing when I read that. Tibetan slaves were mere subjects, much like in the UK, or subjects to the king. That's rewriting history, if you ask me. When these subjects live in dirt-poor state, pay exorbitant taxes, owe lifeline debts, and are bound to the estate, they are usually called slaves. The article also says some have argued that Xizang was already on the path of reform and did not need China's intervention. It looks like the great improvement of the standard of living in Xizang is nothing but a side note. Easy to achieve, nothing to write home about. When the GDP grows by 1,600 times, that's just nothing. Well, I beg to differ on that part. China has invested huge resources, as we can tell, to develop the region, which used to be a battleground for geopolitical influence by great powers in East Asia. Is that just a sidekick, a side note? Sorry, that's laughable. Even self-styled so-called impartial journalists cannot be immune from ignorance, let alone bad faith. Anyway, I want to wrap up there, but actually, the list goes on. The kind of media articles I can pick goes on, and which farce would be complete without, for the media, for the Western media, to challenge China's sovereignty over Xizang. On May the 7th, the Financial Times published a letter saying that Tibet is right to challenge China's sovereignty claim, that it seems China draws its territorial claim to Xizang purely from history. That's a bit rich. Purely from history? If history doesn't matter, what does? Plus, Xizang is not challenging China's sovereignty claim. Some people outside the region do, often because they have a horse in that race, if you take my meaning, and I'll talk about that with my guests. Finally, this US report on so-called international media freedom sums up a line in the first act of Macbeth with the three witches. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and fill the air. It sets the tone for the remainder of the play by establishing a sense of moral confusion. Evil is depicted as good, while good is rendered evil. Such confusion is at play in Tibet reporting. Based on hearsay and dubious research, the Xizang narrative in the West is willfully and unrepentantly deleting, omitting, and twisting facts. Having seen Xizang with my own eyes, I can only marvel at how masterful some have become at this game. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference. Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined online by Colin McCarrath, an Australian sinologist, joining us from Beijing. We're also pleased to have Aina Tangen, who is Senior Fellow with Taihe Institute, an independent think tank, and Rafael Henrique Zabeto, a Brazilian Esperanto expert from the Asia Pacific Center of China International Communications Group. Gentlemen, welcome to Headline Buster. Let me go to Professor McCarrath first. You have been to Tibet and you've written about the subject, but help us understand, how did this whole saga concerning religious freedom or territorial claim of Tibet first started to surface? What was the historical context of this whole narrative in the West?
Well, I think after the 17-point agreement, which was mentioned already in 1951, the Americans tried during the 50s to stir up trouble in Sichuan, the Sichuanese areas of the Tibetan areas, and also in Tibet itself. They made no secret of this fact, and they were even quite proud of it. In 1959, there was a big rebellion, and the Dalai Lama left Lhasa and fled to India, to Dharamsala, where he still lives. I think that what this did was to politicize the whole thing, and it made the Americans, want to see it in a very bad light. They ignored, as you rightly said before, they ignored the fact that serfdom had been overcome, and that the life of the Tibetan people was already much better than it had been before. And they did every effort they could to make bad reports about what was happening in Xizang. Now, in 1987 and 88 and 89, there were more disturbances, which were definitely provoked by the Americans. I mean, there's no question about that. In fact, in 1989, the Americans had got it secured that the Dalai Lama was given the Nobel Peace Prize, which, I mean, is absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me. I mean, what is the circumstance? You ask me why it's like this. I think it's become very politicized, and the Americans have an act to grind. The American government, there has an act to grind, in making it look very bad, in making everything look bad, as if the human rights are being abused. And I may say also that the Dalai Lama became a kind of icon also, and his view was believed, and he had an axe to grind in making things look bad in Tibet itself, so that he himself could look good. And I think he became, as I said, an icon. And a lot of people in the West thought, oh, he's a nice holy man. We believe him. We don't believe the propaganda from China. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Professor McCarrath, if I'm allowed to follow up a little bit, what is the United States' game by politicizing the Tibet issue? What do they try to achieve?
I think a lot of people in the United States think that Tibet should be independent, and I think they want to tear China apart. They don't want a Chinese unity. And I think a lot of people are doing everything they can to secure that in. And it's the same in Xinjiang too, by the way. They've been trying to stir up trouble. I don't say everybody is like that, but I do say that there are a lot of who are doing that, and they have a political purpose in doing it.
Aina, your comments on the same questions.
Well, I agree with Colin. I mean, but I think you're giving too much credence to this. The U.S., we have a standard tactic. We accuse others of the things that we have done or continue to do. And we, use any wedge issue or potential wedge issue that we can either gin up or, it doesn't matter about facts. I mean, the intelligence services of the U.S. are funded at $90 billion a year. 330 million of that goes to the National Endowment for Democracy. Well, what is this group? Well, they're funded by the U.S. government, and their job is regime change. They are there to make sure that every country adheres to American values. And if there's powers in being that don't adhere to America's values, they are free to go in there and try to literally destabilize the regime and bring it down. They've been very active in Tibet and on the Tibetan issue. And this is just America's way of trying to weaken China. I think China should not pay too much attention to these hypocritical statements. The fact is, China has one of the best stories there are. And Xizang is exactly that. You have a place that was, a bone-crushing cruelty of being a serf for life, having your children sentenced to the same fate forever, all right, under a cabal that put the lamas and the nobility who owned everybody and everything underneath them. It was a dark ages feudalism, as was said in the earlier report. And China has made it into a modern place where people now live to over 72 years, versus, as you said, 35.5 years. One of the biggest issues is that people in the West, especially English speaking, they read a novel called Lost Horizons, which painted Tibet as this idyllic place where people lived well into their hundreds and beyond, and everything was wonderful. It couldn't be further from the truth. That was just a novel. It was pure fiction. But unfortunately, it has colored everybody's view of Xizang.
Okay. Raphael, you just visited Xizang. Tell us about your experience. Was it your first time in that region? What did you see? What did you not see?
Yes, I was there last week. I can say, first of all, it's a very beautiful place. We all know that, many beautiful scenic spots. And I also saw much development in the region. So I'd like to focus on two topics that are the environmental protection. I could see the protection there is great. The environment is very well preserved. And in the region of Lhasa, it's even being improved. The government is adopting new techniques to plant trees in the surroundings of the city to improve the environmental conditions for the local people. And the other one that I would like to stress is the poverty alleviation work that has been done there in Xizang. So together with the poverty alleviation work, the infrastructure was improved, the tourism industry was very well developed, there were created job opportunities, also opportunities for local people to study, to have a better life. And I could see it really worked, it's really effective. And then the people in Xizang could be lifted up from poverty. This is a very important situation there because, poverty is the biggest problem that we have nowadays in the world, in my opinion. And here in China, we succeeded to do a very good poverty alleviation work. And all Chinese citizens, including those in Xizang, were lifted up from poverty. And of course, I also noticed that people in Xizang, they really have religious freedom. I even visited some holy places there for the Buddhists. And I could see people that around the believers in Buddhism, they were practicing their religion without any restriction, everything working fine.
Raphael, how refreshing, how enlightening was this experience to visit Tibet? Because before people go there, it's just my experience, before you actually see it and be on the ground yourself, it is impossible to understand the degree to which the lies have been, blinding people's eyes all over the world. So how did it feel for you before you went there? I'm sure you also read about Tibet on all kinds of media. How big was the gap for you?
Well, yes, it's a big gap because before coming to China, everything I knew about Xizang was the information provided by Western media. And they say, for example, that here in China, people cannot speak about the Dalai Lama. They say it's forbidden. But here, for example, especially there in Xizang, when we visited the places, they mention it because it's part of the history of Xizang. You cannot neglect that the Dalai Lamas existed and, well, that they had like a position of like a political and religious leader of the region. So we can see that many information about Xizang abroad is not real. When you go there, you can see the truth. And of course, people say about restrictions to religious practices. And I also noticed that people can practice their religion. Actually, now we are in the end of May, and in this time of the year, the Buddhists, they have the celebrations for preparing for the birthday of Buddha. And because of that, I saw many people in Lhasa on pilgrimage. And then the local government even arranged for them to have a better experience there. So I saw, for example, the police is stopping the traffic for the believers to cross the street, giving this kind of assistance to make the pilgrimage even better for them, even more comfortable. Also, I'm in China since the end of 2015, and I had the opportunities already to visit Buddhist temples and also mosques and other places for religious use in other places in China.
Yeah.
I also visited Xinjiang twice, and I noticed that also there, like the accusations that China is not allowing Muslims to freely exert their religion is also a lie. I even interviewed the imams in some mosques. So I was already prepared to hear that it's they also tell lies about Islam.
Professor Mukaris, what is this whole accusation of China not respecting religious freedom of followers of religion about? I mean, what are they trying to beat the drum for by, this against Muslims in Xinjiang and now against Buddhist followers in Tibet? What do you think these people are trying to drill into the mind of the ordinary people in the West?
Well, I think it's to say that China is bad, the People's Republic is bad, and that it should be brought down. And that's what they're trying to stop China's rise. And I think it's a propaganda exercise, as I said before. And I mean, as for the whole question of religious freedom, it seems to me that when the Chinese government talks about normal religious activities, it means that it's not going to tolerate religious activities that are going to be used to try and overthrow the government. And there have been quite a few of these in Tibet and in Xinjiang. And it seems to me that it's as you said earlier, it's not unusual that people will want to try and protect the government, and they're going to stop religious activities that are against the government. But I just think that everything I've seen, and I agree with what Raphael said. I mean, I've been around a lot of places in China with religion, and what I see is that normal religious activities are respected, and people go about them very normally. I mean, in Tibet, for example, The pilgrims are very, very common, and you see them on the road. Even they go down they make obeisance every step, and then can proceed on their way. I mean, I think it's very, very open. And you look at the monasteries; they're full of monks now. There are a lot of them, the lamas. And in 2021, when President Xi Jinping went to Tibet, lamas greeted him. I mean, that's not like saying that the government's suppressing religious freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, when monks come out to greet the president and the head of the government, I just think the whole thing is a lot of propaganda exercise, and I think it is basically false and malicious in intent.
Okay. Finally, Aina, you know the United States, you're an American. Tell us a bit about religious freedom in the United States. Is this something to be very proud and, serving as an example for the rest of the world?
Well, just let me add something on to my experiences here in China. First off, the government does not discourage any kinds of spirituality. I mean, I know people who are Confucius, they follow Taoism, Buddhism, there are Catholics here and things like that, but you cannot have a church that's unregistered. Now, in the United States, we have the same thing. If you are a church and you want to have an exemption, you cannot get involved in politics. That's not saying that they're not getting involved, but there's supposed to be a separation between church and state. And there have been many, many instances where, this has been broken. I mean, in Waco, Texas, there was a big massacre there because these radicals were, in essence, preaching this idea that they were going to go against the United States government. They were involved in illegal activities. You had the same thing with the Bundys in Oregon, and you've had this whole long history. I mean, the Pilgrims themselves, most people would consider them a religious cult. They were literally drummed out of England and then Holland, and they went to America because no one else wanted them. There, they imposed their own very strict standards. They used to hang people who were, as they said, free thinkers or non-believers. And that happened for quite a few years into the actual birth of the new nation. So those laws were on the books. And then, what happened to the American Indians? They were suppressed brutally, just as in South America. The churches, Protestant and Catholic alike, said you either believe as we do, or we will, in essence, kill you or let God sort you out, as they say. There were all sorts of conflicts with the Mormons. They wanted to have more than one wife. That was their religious belief. They were persecuted. They were forced to give up the more than one wife idea. It was a law. So in the United States, as I said, the things that we have done, we accuse others of doing.
Well, that's very rich. I hope we are not being forced to copy that kind of freedom anytime soon in our country's history. I have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, Colin McCarras, an Australian sinologist joining us from Beijing, Aina Tangen, Senior Fellow with the Taihe Institute, and Rafael Enrique Zerbeto, Brazilian Esperanto expert of the Asia-Pacific Center of China International Communications Group. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.